All right, getting the chat ready. Welcome to Advancement Tech. Just leaving this a few moments to get up to speed. All right, seems like we're online. All right, hope everyone's having a great Friday and you're ready to learn more about why you should use HTTPS. So I'll actually get started with the content in a moment here. All right, so we're doing why your website should use HTTPS. My name is Preston Jameson, and this is Advancement Tech, Episode 4. So we are live on YouTube. We are going to be using the live chat. So if you have a question on anything that I cover, you can go ahead and put that in the chat. I will be monitoring it as the show goes on. And to be able to chat, you do need a YouTube account to be able to do that. So just keep that in mind. All right. I think we'll go ahead and get started because we are at the 1 minute mark. So welcome. So thank you for attending. So first, I just wanted to give a little bit of background about myself. We're going to have about 15 to 20 minutes of education, and then we're going to have a Q&A period where you get the opportunity in chat to ask me some questions about the topic or any other technical topic. All right, so who am I? My name is Preston Jameson. I've worked at 2 different universities over 12 years. I oversaw development and advancement services at those universities, and I founded a company that developed a product called Advancement Form, and it does online giving and event registration. All right, so the first thing I wanted to cover is if your website, should you be using HTTPS, is basically compare what's the difference between HTTP and HTTPS, and then what is it? So HTTP stands for Hypertext Transport Protocol. So you can think of it as a language. It's a protocol that browsers have agreed upon to talk to web servers. So whenever a browser contacts a web server, it speaks this HTTP protocol or HTTPS. Now, S just means it's secure, so it has a lot of different security features that have been added onto it. Now, I should also note that is why that when you're looking at a website, so this is the Advancement Form website, it says HTTPS up here because you are speaking the HTTPS protocol with the web server. Now, your browser can also speak other languages. It can do FTP. WebDAV may be another one, but the protocol we're focusing on today, of course, is HTTPS because that's the one that's used in web servers. Okay. All right, so secure. What does it mean by secure? So the first thing that you hear usually is that it encrypts traffic between your web browser and the web server. So what does encrypt mean? It means it scrambles it. It means if someone was able to be between you and the web server, if it grabbed that traffic, there would be no way to read it. It would be obscured. Now, this includes all the content that's being sent, so any images and text, anything submitted by forms, all of it is encrypted and protected in that way. But it also includes things like the URL path, in other words, where the page you're going to is. So it basically will obscure where you're visiting on that website. It will still know that you visited that domain. That is something that people can see, but not kind of where you went on that domain. And it also obscures any parameters, and parameters are things that are included with the URL that sometimes you'll see with form submissions and things of that nature. Okay, so in addition to encrypting and protecting the traffic between them, it also ensures that the data has not been modified while being transferred from your web browser to the web server. So if you're using HTTP, the non-secure version, it is possible for someone to grab that traffic and actually manipulate it before they deliver it to you. So that's something that one reason that HTTPS is a better option, because it prevents that modification. Now, it also authenticates that the web server you are contacting is the correct one, because with HTTP, there's no assurance of that. So, for example, you could actually be talking to a server that is not what you think it is. Like if you try to go to mybank.com, for example, that's maybe not a website, but your bank of choice, and you were contacting it via HTTP, there's no guarantees that that could be a different bank. And HTTPS assures you're talking to the right web server, and we'll talk a little bit about that here. All right, now before we get into a little bit more discussions, you'll also hear the terms SSL and TLS. So what is that? So SSL stands for Secure Socket Layer. Now you'll also hear TLS, which stands for Transport Layer Security. And they're basically protocols, again, that help secure that transmission. So they're cryptographic protocols, basically. Now, one thing you may be hearing in terms of these terms is like when you're getting an SSL certificate. Well, you actually may also hear them be TLS certificates. So all versions of SSL are considered insecure. So right now, today, when you hear SSL in terms of the protocol, it's usually not deemed secure, and you want to use TLS. And there's even specific versions that are considered more secure. So like right now, versions 1.2 and higher are considered pretty secure. Although there's still some sites that use 1.1, but that's for greater compatibility. Now, your web serving provider or your website provider should handle some of this, but this is just some background information with regard to this if you hear these terms. Now, talking about HTTPS, it's important to talk about certificates, because that's usually the first thing you have to get is a certificate to enable HTTPS on your web server or your website. So certificates are usually called SSL or TLS certificates. Now, again, like I mentioned, these are needed to enable HTTPS on your website. Now, these are usually issued by a certificate authority. So what is a certificate authority? It's basically some organization that have established we're going to produce these certificates, and the browsers, like mainstream browsers such as Safari, Chrome, Microsoft's Internet Explorer, or Edge browser, Firefox, they have established certain authorities that they will trust who generate these certificates. So if you want every web browser or the vast majority of web browsers to contact your web server in a HTTPS connection, you need to get your certificate from one of these certificate authorities. Now, I'll mention here just for completeness is that you can create your own certificate authority and create essentially self-signed certificates for internal purposes. But to reach the vast majority of traffic, you're going to want to get one from an established certificate authority. Now to talk a little bit about certificate verification, in that certificates include the domains for which they are valid. So when you go get a certificate, you're going to request what domain or domains it will be valid for, because that's part of what makes it secure. When your web browser checks the certificate, it wants to match that domain name with the site that you're visiting to make sure it's identical. And this goes back to validating you're contacting the correct site or the correct web server. So this ensures you're only creating a secure session with a valid server website. Now, this is how I like to think about it. Basically, your browser is saying, I know the signature of my authorities. So each browser has a list of certificate authorities. And if I see a certificate that is signed from one of these authorities, I will go ahead and trust that website and make sure the domains match. And if they do, then I'll go ahead and talk with this website. So let's take a look at what I mentioned here in terms of certificate authorities. So if I go to, I'm in the Chrome browser, and I'm going to go to Settings, and then I'm going to go to Advanced. Then if you scroll down, there should be, I believe it's the Manage Certificates. Oh, I believe I've lost the location where it's at. All right, well, basically there is a way to see the certificate authorities for Chrome. I'm missing it right now, but I'll check this later if people are interested in seeing that. But there is a way to look at what certificate authorities that your browser trusts. But let's go back and go ahead and look at what's called the handshake. In other words, how web browsers talk to web servers. So this is a diagram that I found on the site ssl.com that talks about the SSL TLS handshake. So the client here is basically your browser, and it's talking to the website or the web server. And the client says, I'd like to set up an encrypted session, please. Here's a list of cipher suites and versions of TLS I'm willing to use. So basically the client is talking to the web server. I can speak these languages, basically. And the server says, hi, let's use essentially this dialect or types of language and the TLS version you're using. And it's going to give it back to the browser. Here's my certificate, including my public key. Now, I'm not going to get into public key authentication, but it's basically a way to validate that the site is who you think it is. Now, the client next verifies the server certificate and gets the public key. So basically it's saying, has this been signed by authority I trust? If so, then the client takes that public key and creates a separate key to send to the server. So it's basically testing, can we talk in an encrypted fashion? So the server then uses its private key to decrypt this pre-master key it's using. Now, basically, this process goes on, and I'll include this link in the show notes, but basically they're coming to an agreement by exchanging these certificates and different keys to say, yes, I trust you, and I believe you are who you say you are. So that enables that secure session to get started. Okay, so going back to the presentation, and I should mention that if you have any questions, please go ahead and feel free to post them in the chat and I will answer them. All right, so now going back to the original question of this presentation, I've presented you a lot, just giving you some background, but some of the main reasons why your website should use HTTPS is that the first one is that Google gives a boost to sites using HTTPS. Now, what do I mean boost? Boost in its rankings. So your site will actually rank higher than sites that aren't using HTTPS. So now it's not a significant boost at this point, but it's definitely one that exists, and you could get higher in the rankings, search rankings for SEO if you are using HTTPS. The second reason is to give your web visitors confidence in your site that their browsing is secure. And I'll mention some of that here, some of the reasons why. The first off is that the data that is submitted when you're using HTTPS is protected from view and alterations. And as more people are using HTTPS sites, they're becoming aware of this. So it's basically a communication to the user, and we'll see some changes that Chrome and even mentioned some that Firefox are making to make it more visible that a site is using HTTPS versus HTTP. So the second is that your page viewing history is protected. So for, like I mentioned, all the information is encrypted in transit, including the URLs that you are visiting. Now, not necessarily what domain you're visiting or website you're visiting, but each page on that site you're visiting, it is protected when you're using HTTPS. And like I mentioned here, you're confident that you're connecting to the correct website. For example, if you go into a cafe, or if you have hotel Wi-Fi or some other location, you're going to an unfamiliar Wi-Fi area, you could be connecting up. If you use HTTP and you're trying to connect to a website using that, you could be contacting someone you did not intend to. So that's another reason HTTPS is important, because you help validate that you are connecting to the correct website. And the next point is that Google Chrome lists HTTP as insecure. So just to take a look at what this looks like. I have this article here from Google's blog, and it talks about a milestone for Chrome security, marking HTTP as not secure. So basically how it used to look for an HTTP page, so not secure, it would look like this. But now Chrome is listing not secure at the top here. In addition, if you are secure, it puts this little green icon. Now, eventually, what they intend to do is actually mark that in red to know that. So for example, here, when you're starting to type an email, you can see it's going to list not secure up here. So again, Chrome, one of the most popular browsers, is making it more visible that HTTP is insecure, and you should be using HTTPS. So going back to the presentation here, another aspect of HTTPS is that you can get more accurate refer statistics. So where a site is referred from, it actually does not provide that if your site you are referred from going from an HTTPS site to an HTTP, you actually lose that information. So another reason why it's important to use HTTPS. And then lastly, browsers actually enable more features when you're using HTTPS. Like geolocation, someone's location is in a lot of ways considered a private information. And to use geolocation now, a lot of the browsers mandate that you're using HTTPS to make sure that's secure. Now to take a look at two other articles here. There's one from the, this is for the developers.google.com. They talk about why HTTPS matters. And they have a short 25-minute video if you want some additional information here. But it talks a lot about what I covered before, is that it protects the integrity of your website. Basically, the information is protected from people being able to see it and be able to change it while it's being transferred, and also protects the privacy and security of your users. Now, another interesting post relevant to this is the transparency report from Google. And this shows about how the percentage of websites using HTTPS is increasing. And this is for the Chrome, and it shows for each of the platforms that Chrome runs on: Windows, Android, Chrome, Linux, and Mac. And you can see it's quickly rising, all of them approaching 100%. So you don't want to be in the HTTP crowd, you want to be in the HTTPS crowd. And so definitely important to go ahead and do that. All right, now the probably next question is, how do you start using HTTPS? So like I mentioned here, the importance of certificates, you need to get a certificate. So how can you do that? So depending on your website provider, they may have a mechanism for you to get a certificate for your site and enable it and turn it on. So you could go that path to do it. The next option is there are plenty of certificate providers out there that for a fee, they give you a server certificate. So for example, you could just Google or do a web search for SSL certificate, and the first page has plenty of reputable providers for providing a server certificate. Now, another option is Let's Encrypt. So this is an organization that provides SSL certificates for free. And this was actually mentioned in the one of the Google talks. So it is backed by a number of large companies that are doing sponsorships to support the site. So that is a valid option to get a server certificate. So the next step after you have a certificate is go ahead and install it on your site and enable HTTPS. And then you need to change any links that you have from HTTP to HTTPS if you have them. Or you could also use relative links that don't have the protocol listed. And then lastly, you're going to want to redirect traffic from HTTP to HTTPS pages for your content to communicate to Google and other search providers that you are changing how you can get to your pages. And then lastly, a recommendation I have is to use SSL Labs SSL test to validate that your SSL test is secure. And it gives you a grade based upon how secure your web server or website is. All right, so that was a fair amount of content, but at this point, I'm ready to ask for questions. So actually, while we do that, while I wait to see if there's any questions, this is the content. So in this video, they actually mentioned the Let's Encrypt website as something that you can use. And so this is the Let's Encrypt website, and you can see all the different major sponsors here. You know, you see rather large organizations like Google's Chrome and Facebook and Mozilla, which develops the Firefox browser, and many other companies that are supporting this initiative. So it's definitely a valid place to get a certificate, even though it is free. All right, so far I don't see any questions in the chat. We're going to go ahead and take a look at upcoming shows. So next Friday, February 22nd at 4 p.m., we're going to do sharing on Facebook. So we're going to talk about the best ways to share on Facebook, how to use their debugger tool to kind of see what your site will look like while you're sharing on Facebook. On Friday after that, March 1st, we're going to cover chatbots and nonprofits. So we're going to look at what's their use case, and we'll examine, should you be using a chatbot or should you not? And then for Fridays after that, we're still coming up with what content would be appropriate. So I'd love to hear from you. What content would you like to hear about in an Advancement Tech episode? You can feel free to comment in the chat, or you can feel free to leave a comment if you're viewing this video later to give suggestions as to what you'd like to see. So we still don't see any questions in the chat. So we're going to head and go to Advancement Tech TV. That is the site that gives a direct link to the show page, advtech.tv. If you like this content, please feel free to drop a like on Facebook or subscribe to us on YouTube, or you can visit advtech.tv and sign up to receive the email notifications that we send out when new episodes go live and when future episodes are going to be going live. All right, I think that is pretty much the content for this week. I don't see any additional questions in the chat, so we will go ahead and close it there. I hope you have a great weekend, and I will see you next Friday.